The photograph sits in my trembling hands, edges worn soft from 19 years of desperate prayers and sleepless nights. Two identical faces stare back at me, matching dimples, matching braids, matching pink ribbons in their hair. My daughters. My babies. Taken from me on a Tuesday morning in September, vanished like morning mist, leaving behind only their tiny sneakers by the back door and a silence so loud it nearly killed me. For 19 years, the world told me they were dead. For 19 years, I believed I was searching for ghosts. But what I discovered in that dusty cardboard box, hidden in the attic of the man I once called my husband, what I found buried beneath old tax returns and forgotten memories, it didn't just change everything I thought I knew about that terrible day. It revealed that the person who destroyed my life had been sleeping beside me all along. This is the story of how I found my daughters. This is the story of how I brought every single person responsible for stealing them to justice. And this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the monsters aren't strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they're the ones who promise to love you forever. If this story moves you, if you've ever loved someone so much it physically hurts, then do me a favor. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this again. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about trust, about family, and about the lengths a mother will go to bring her children home and make the guilty pay for what they've done. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and in September of 2002, I was living what I thought was a perfectly ordinary life in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I was 32 years old, married to my high school sweetheart Daniel, and mother to the two most beautiful 4-year-old girls the world had ever seen, Emma and Lily. They came into this world holding hands, and for the first 4 years of their lives, they were inseparable. Emma was the brave one, always climbing trees and chasing butterflies. Lily was gentler, preferring her picture books and her stuffed rabbit named Mr. Whiskers. But together, they were complete. Two halves of the same perfect whole. Our house on Maple Street was nothing special. A modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a tire swing in the backyard. Daniel worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, which meant he traveled frequently, sometimes for weeks at a time. I worked part-time at the local library, shelving books and running the children's reading hour. Our life was quiet, predictable, safe, or so I desperately wanted to believe. Looking back now, with the terrible clarity that only hindsight provides, I can see the cracks that I was too naive to notice. The way Daniel's eyes would sometimes go cold when he looked at me. The business trips that seemed to grow longer and more frequent. The phone calls he would take in the garage, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent whenever I approached. But I was raised to trust my husband. I was raised to believe that marriage meant never questioning, never doubting, never looking too closely at the shadows gathering in the corners of your home. The morning of September 17th, 2002, started like any other Tuesday. I woke before the sun, made coffee, and laid out matching outfits for the girls. Purple dresses with white Peter Pan collars, their favorite. Daniel was supposed to be in Chicago for a conference, had left 2 days earlier with his leather suitcase and a distracted kiss goodbye. I remember thinking he seemed nervous, but I chalked it up to work stress. I was always making excuses for him, always finding reasons to explain away the unease that had begun to nest in my chest like a bird I couldn't quite catch. The girls woke at 7, tumbling down the stairs in that chaotic, joyful way that only small children can manage. Breakfast was scrambled eggs and toast, cut into triangles the way they liked it. We sang songs while I braided their hair. Emma wanted a story about pirates. Lily wanted to know if butterflies dreamed. These are the memories I hold on to, the ones I play on repeat in my mind like a film I never want to end. Because what came next, what happened in the hours that followed, would become a nightmare from which I would spend nearly 2 decades trying to wake. At 9:30, I walked the girls to the backyard to play while I finished loading the dishwasher. Our yard was fenced, secure. I had checked the latch myself just that morning. The September air was crisp and golden, carrying the first hints of autumn on its breath. I could hear them laughing through the kitchen window, the pure, unself-conscious laughter of children who have never known fear. I stepped away for maybe 10 minutes, Maybe 15. I was running water, scrubbing the pan I'd used for eggs, listening to the radio play a song I can no longer remember without feeling sick. When I returned to the window, the yard was empty. I remember the sound that came out of me. It wasn't a scream. It was something more primal, more animal, ripped from a place so deep inside me that I didn't know it existed until that moment. I ran outside, calling their names. Emma, Lily, my voice echoing off the silent trees, the empty swing set, the fence gate that stood wide open like a mouth mocking my foolish belief that I could keep my children safe. The sneakers were there. 2 pairs of tiny white sneakers, abandoned by the back steps, as if the girls had been plucked from the earth itself, leaving behind only this evidence that they had ever existed at all. The next hours exist in my memory as a blur of sirens and strangers. Police officers with notepads and sympathetic eyes. Neighbors gathering on the sidewalk, whispering behind their hands. Search dogs that circled the yard, noses to the ground, following a scent that ended abruptly at the curb where a car must have been waiting. I answered questions until my voice gave out. No, I hadn't seen anyone suspicious. No, the girls wouldn't go with a stranger. No, I couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt them. What I didn't tell the police, what I couldn't bring myself to say out loud, was the tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering that something about this felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Daniel arrived home that night, cutting his trip short the moment I called. He held me while I sobbed, stroked my hair, promised that we would find them. His face was a mask of anguish, his eyes red from crying, his hands shaking as he gripped mine. The perfect picture of a devastated father. And I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. I didn't know then that his tears were not grief, but fear. Fear that something would go wrong with his carefully constructed plan. Fear that someone would see through his performance. Fear that the man he had hired to take our daughters would be caught before he could deliver them to their new life, far away from me. The search for Emma and Lily became a consuming fire that burned through every aspect of my existence. I put up flyers until my fingers bled from paper cuts. I appeared on local news, then national news, begging whoever had taken my daughters to bring them home. I hired private investigators, drained our savings, took out loans against the house. Daniel supported me through all of it, holding press conferences by my side, organizing volunteer search parties, being the strong one when I couldn't get out of bed. And all the while, he knew exactly where they were. All the while, he watched me destroy myself searching for children he had hidden in plain sight. Weeks became months. Months became years. The world moved on, as the world always does, but I remained frozen in that September morning, unable to escape the moment when my life split into before and after. The police eventually told me what they always tell the parents of missing children, that the odds of finding them alive decreased with each passing day, that I should prepare myself for the worst, that perhaps it was time to consider saying goodbye. I refused. A mother knows, they say, and I knew with every fiber of my being that my daughters were still alive somewhere in this world. I could feel them like phantom limbs, a constant ache where they should have been. Some nights I would wake from dreams where I could hear them calling me, their voices so clear and real that I would run through the house, throwing open closet doors and checking under beds, certain that they had finally found their way home. But every morning brought only silence, only absence, only the crushing weight of another day without them. Daniel and I drifted apart in the way that tragedy often separates couples. Grief is lonely work, and we each retreated into our own private hells, unable to reach across the growing distance between us. He threw himself into his work, traveling more than ever, climbing the corporate ladder with a determination that seemed almost frantic. I retreated into my search, covering the walls of Emma and Lily's bedroom with maps and timelines and photographs, creating a web of information that the police had long since stopped updating. What I didn't know was that his frantic work travel often included secret visits to Montana, where he would spend weekends with the daughters he had stolen, living a double life so complete that not even his closest colleagues suspected the truth. By 2007, 5 years after the abduction, Daniel told me he wanted a divorce. He said he couldn't live this way anymore. That my obsession with finding the girls was destroying me, destroying us. That perhaps it was time to accept reality and try to build a new life from the ashes of our old one. I remember staring at him as he spoke, watching his mouth form words that didn't make sense, and wondering how this man I had loved since I was 16 could look at me and ask me to abandon our children. I signed the papers because fighting him felt pointless. Because some part of me believed that maybe he was right, that maybe I had lost myself so completely in the search that there was nothing left of the woman he had married. After the divorce, Daniel moved to California. New job, new life, new beginning. He sent Christmas cards for the first few years, then gradually faded from my world entirely. I stayed in Cedar Falls, in the same house on Maple Street, unable to leave the last place my daughters had been safe. The neighbors thought I was crazy. The town had mostly forgotten about the missing Sullivan twins, replaced that tragedy with newer, fresher headlines. But I remained, a ghost haunting my own life, keeping vigil for daughters who might never return. I worked at the library until my eyesight grew too poor for reading fine print, then took early retirement. I lived frugally, saving every penny for private investigators and false leads that never led anywhere but heartbreak. I followed every tip, no matter how unlikely. Traveled to 14 different states, chasing sightings that turned out to be other people's daughters. Each disappointment should have broken me, but instead, it only strengthened my resolve. They were out there. I knew they were out there. The lead detective on my case was a man named Robert Hartley, a veteran investigator with 30 years on the force. In those early days, he worked tirelessly, following every lead, interviewing every neighbor, treating my daughter's disappearance with the urgency it deserved. But as the years passed and the case grew cold, even Detective Hartley's dedication began to waver. He would later tell me, in a confession that came far too late to matter, that he had always suspected Daniel. Something about my husband's grief had seemed performed, he said. Too perfect, too polished, like a man playing a role rather than living through tragedy. But suspicion without evidence is worthless, and Daniel had covered his tracks with the meticulous care of someone who had planned every detail months in advance. In 2015, I had a breakdown. Found myself sitting in Emma and Lily's bedroom, talking to their empty beds as if they were listening, telling them about my day, asking about their dreams. A concerned neighbor called the authorities, and I spent 2 months in a facility where kind doctors tried to convince me that my daughters were gone and that my refusal to accept this truth was a form of mental illness. They gave me pills that made the world feel distant and foggy. They taught me coping mechanisms and grief exercises. They tried to teach me how to say goodbye. I played along. I said the words they wanted to hear. I pretended to accept the reality they insisted was true. And when they released me, I went right back to searching, more carefully this time, hiding my investigation from well-meaning friends who would only try to stop me. Because I knew something the doctors didn't. I knew that my daughters were alive. I knew that somewhere in this vast country, they were growing up without me, perhaps wondering about the mother they had been told was dead. And I knew that I would never stop looking, not until I found them or until my own heart stopped beating. Then came October of 2021. Daniel had been dead for 3 months, killed in a car accident on a highway outside San Diego. I hadn't spoken to him in years, hadn't even known he was sick with the cancer that had made him fall asleep at the wheel. A lawyer called to tell me that, surprisingly, Daniel had left me everything in his will. His house, his savings, his possessions. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was some lingering connection to our shared past. I didn't care about the money or the house. I only agreed to go to California because someone needed to sort through his things, and there was no one else. The house Daniel had lived in for the past decade was modest but well kept, a single-story ranch in a quiet suburb of San Diego. I walked through the rooms slowly, looking at the evidence of a life I had not been part of for 15 years. He had never remarried, never had other children. The refrigerator held expired milk and a half-eaten sandwich. The living room was clean but impersonal, like a hotel room rather than a home. I found the attic access in the hallway ceiling, a pull-down ladder that groaned with age when I lowered it. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Old photographs, maybe. Something to help me understand the man Daniel had become in the years since he left me. The attic was dusty and crowded with cardboard boxes, most labeled in Daniel's neat handwriting. Tax returns, college memories, miscellaneous. One box had no label. I almost didn't open it. Almost moved on to the next stack, the next pile of forgotten papers and abandoned possessions. But something made me pause. Something made me reach for that particular box, pull back the flaps, and look inside. The first thing I saw was a photograph. Two young women, maybe 22 or 23 years old, standing in front of a white clapboard church. They were smiling, arms around each other's waist, faces turned toward the camera with expressions of pure joy. Twins. Identical twins, with dark hair and matching dimples and eyes that I would have recognized anywhere, even after 19 years, even after a lifetime of searching. Emma and Lily, my daughters, alive. The photograph slipped from my fingers as the world tilted on its axis. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing, what it meant, what terrible truth had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. I grabbed the box, appending its contents onto the dusty attic floor, and began to read the documents that spilled out like poison. Birth certificates, fake ones, dated 1998, listing a fictional mother named Sarah Barnes and a father named Daniel Barnes. School records from a small town in Montana I had never heard of. Medical records. Photographs, dozens of them, documenting 2 girls growing from childhood through adolescence through young adulthood. A life, a complete life, lived entirely without me, documented in this box as if it were nothing more than old receipts to be stored and forgotten. And then I found the journal. Daniel's handwriting filled page after page, a confessional that he had never intended anyone to read. The entries began in August of 2002, 1 month before my daughters disappeared, and continued sporadically for nearly 15 years. I sat in that dusty attic and read every word, watching my husband's carefully constructed mask crumble with each revelation. The affair had started in 2001. Her name was Christine Palmer, a marketing executive at Daniel's company, and by the spring of 2002, she was pregnant with his child. Christine had given Daniel an ultimatum: leave your wife and marry me, or I go to your boss and tell him everything. Daniel, ever the strategist, had agreed to her demands. But he had no intention of sharing custody of Emma and Lily with me. He wanted a clean break, a fresh start, with his daughters by his side and his inconvenient wife left behind to wonder what had happened. The plan had been months in the making. Daniel had recruited his cousin Sarah Barnes, a widow living in rural Montana, to serve as the girl's new mother. He had told Sarah a carefully constructed lie, that I was mentally unstable, abusive, dangerous, that he needed to get the girls away from me before I hurt them. Sarah, who had always wanted children of her own, had agreed to help without asking too many questions. But Daniel couldn't take the girls himself. He needed an alibi, needed to be far away from Cedar Falls when they disappeared so that no suspicion would fall on him. So he had hired a man named Marcus Webb, a long-haul trucker with a criminal record and a desperate need for money. Marcus had been paid $20,000 to take my daughters from the backyard, drive them to Montana, and deliver them to Sarah Barnes. The entire operation had taken less than 6 hours. By the time I called Daniel in Chicago, hysterical with grief, Emma and Lily were already settling into their new home, being told that their mother had gone to heaven and that Aunt Sarah would take care of them now. The plan had been working perfectly until Christine discovered what Daniel had done. She had expected him to simply divorce me, not orchestrate an elaborate kidnapping that could send both of them to prison for decades. Horrified by the monster she had gotten involved with, she had ended the affair and threatened to go to the police. Daniel had bought her silence with money, setting up monthly payments that continued for 18 years. The pregnancy, I learned from the journal, had ended in miscarriage. Christine had lost the baby that had set this entire nightmare in motion. But she had kept cashing Daniel's checks, kept her mouth shut while I searched desperately for children she knew were safe. I read about Daniel's visits to Montana, weekends spent with the daughters who called him Uncle Danny and had no memory of the mother who loved them. I read about his guilt, his fear, his rationalizations. He told himself he had done what was best for the girls, that I was too fragile to raise them properly, that they were happier with Sarah, in a small town where everyone knew everyone, than they would have been with a mother slowly losing her mind to grief. The self-delusion was breathtaking, the narcissism so complete that even now, knowing everything he did, I can hardly comprehend it. The journal also contained names. Marcus Webb, the man who had physically taken my daughters. Helen Cross, Sarah's sister, who had helped create the forged documents. Two executives at Daniel's company, Gerald Heston and Paul Whitfield, who had used corporate resources to establish the fake identities. A network of accomplices, each playing their part in the destruction of my life, each believing they would never be caught. Daniel was wrong about that. Dead or not, he had left me everything I needed to bring his entire conspiracy crashing down. I don't remember calling the police. Don't remember the hours that followed, the questions and the statements and the stunned expressions of detectives who couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. What I remember is the determination that crystallized in my chest like ice, cold and sharp and absolutely certain. I was going to find my daughters. I was going to look into their eyes and tell them who I was. And then I was going to make sure that every single person who had helped steal them from me paid for what they had done. The private investigator I hired was a former FBI agent named Rachel Chun, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. I showed her the documents, the journal, the photographs. I watched her face carefully for any sign of disbelief or judgment. She showed neither. The trail, she said, was actually fairly straightforward once you knew what to look for. Daniel had moved the girls to a small town called Millbrook, Montana, population 4,000, where he had installed them with Sarah Barnes. Sarah had raised them as her own daughters, calling them Rebecca and Rachel Barnes, telling them that their father was Daniel's brother who had died in an accident and that their mother had died giving birth to them. A complete fiction, built on lies and maintained through decades of careful deception. While Rachel tracked down my daughter's current location, I worked with law enforcement to build cases against Daniel's accomplices. The FBI became involved once the scope of the conspiracy became clear, and suddenly I had an entire team of agents working to ensure that justice would finally be served. They treated me with a respect I had never received during the original investigation, acknowledging that my refusal to give up had been vindicated in the most extraordinary way possible. Marcus Webb was the first to be arrested. He was 67 years old now, a retired truck driver living quietly in a trailer park in Nebraska. The DNA evidence from the original crime scene, samples that had been preserved for 19 years, matched his profile perfectly. When agents arrived at his door with handcuffs and a warrant, he reportedly looked almost relieved. The secret had been weighing on him for 2 decades, and now it was finally over. His interrogation lasted 12 hours. Marcus confessed to everything, claiming that Daniel had told him the children were being rescued from an abusive mother. He said he had believed he was doing something noble, saving 2 little girls from a monster. The lie had helped him sleep at night, helped him justify the nightmares that plagued him whenever he remembered 2 4-year-olds crying in the back seat of his truck, asking for their mommy. I want to pause here and ask you something. If someone told you they were saving children from abuse, would you help them without asking for proof? Would you trust their word enough to participate in a crime that would destroy an innocent woman's life? Leave me a comment and tell me what you think. Because the excuses these people made for themselves, the rationalizations they used to justify their actions, they haunt me to this day. Helen Cross was arrested 3 days later. Sarah's sister had helped forge the birth certificates, school records, and medical documents that had given my daughters their false identities. Unlike Marcus, Helen showed no remorse. She had loved her sister, she said, and Sarah had desperately wanted children. In Helen's mind, she had simply helped make her sister's dream come true. The fact that this dream required stealing another woman's children seemed, to her, like an acceptable price to pay. The company executives, Gerald Heston and Paul Whitfield, were arrested at their offices in matching perp walks that made the national news. They had used corporate resources to create false identities, manipulated company travel records to hide Daniel's secret visits to Montana, and looked the other way when the evidence of his crimes became impossible to ignore. Whether they fully understood what Daniel had done remains a matter of debate, but their willingness to help him was crime enough. Christine Palmer was the last to be arrested, and in many ways, her capture was the most satisfying. She had known. From the moment she threatened to expose Daniel, she had known that my daughters were alive and hidden. For 18 years, she had cashed his monthly checks, blood money paid to ensure her silence, while I slowly lost my mind searching for children she could have led me to with a single phone call. When agents arrived at her door, she was living in a beautiful house in Connecticut, married to a wealthy banker, mother to 2 children who would now grow up knowing their mother was a criminal. The drive to Montana took 3 days. I could have flown, but I needed the time to prepare myself for what was coming. 19 years of searching had led to this moment, and I was terrified in ways I couldn't articulate. What if they didn't believe me? What if they refused to see me? What if they had built lives that had no room for the mother who had been searching for them all along? I arrived in Millbrook on a Thursday afternoon in November, the air cold and thin at this elevation. The bakery where my daughters worked was called Sweet Dreams, a small storefront on Main Street with a hand-painted sign and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the door. I sat in my car across the street for 2 hours, watching customers come and go, working up the courage to walk inside. When I finally pushed through the door, the bell above it chiming my arrival, I saw them immediately. They were behind the counter, both wearing white aprons dusted with flour, both laughing at something a customer had said. My legs went weak. My heart stopped. For a moment, I was back in that September morning, watching them through the kitchen window, not yet knowing that my world was about to end. They looked so much like me. The same dark hair, now worn long and loose. The same dimples that appeared when they smiled. The same way of tilting their heads when listening, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. But there were traces of Daniel too, in the shape of their jaws and the color of their eyes. Evidence that they were made from both of us, created by a love that had once been real, however polluted it became by his later betrayal. "May I help you?" one of them asked, the one I would later learn was Emma, now called Rebecca. Her voice was warm and professional, giving no indication that she was looking at a stranger. Because to her, I was a stranger, a random customer in a random bakery, not the woman who had given her life, not the mother who had searched for her for 19 years. I couldn't speak. Stood there with my mouth open like a fool, tears streaming down my face, unable to form the words I had rehearsed 1,000 times on the drive here. Both girls exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that only twins seem capable of. The other one, Lily, now called Rachel, came around the counter with a glass of water, guiding me gently to a chair. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Is there someone we can call?" "I'm your mother," I finally managed, my voice breaking on the words. "My name is Margaret Sullivan. You were taken from me when you were 4 years old, and I have been searching for you every day since." The silence that followed felt endless. I watched disbelief, confusion, and fear flash across their faces in rapid succession. Rebecca actually laughed, a nervous sound that cut off abruptly when she saw my expression. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, the way you might speak to someone you suspect is mentally unstable. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. Our mother was Sarah Barnes. She passed away 3 years ago. We grew up here, in Millbrook. We've never even been to—" "Where did you say you were from?" "Iowa," I whispered. "Cedar Falls, Iowa. And I can prove everything I'm saying." I had brought the documents from Daniel's box. The real birth certificates, the ones listing me as mother. Newspaper clippings from 2002 with photographs of the search. A family album with pictures of them as babies, as toddlers, matching the faces that now looked back at me with growing uncertainty. I also brought the journal, Daniel's confession in his own handwriting, the irrefutable evidence of everything he had done. Rachel took the papers first, her hands trembling slightly as she examined them. I watched her face change as the evidence accumulated, as the reality of what I was telling them became impossible to deny. Rebecca stood behind her sister, reading over her shoulder, shaking her head in a gesture that seemed more reflex than conviction. "This doesn't make sense," she finally said. "Sarah was our mother. She loved us. She wouldn't have. She couldn't have. She was lied to at first, I said gently. Daniel told her I was abusive, that he was saving you from me. But she learned the truth eventually, and she chose to stay silent. I know that's hard to hear. I know you loved her. But the woman who raised you knew I was alive and searching, and she never told anyone. The grief that crossed their faces was almost too painful to witness. In a single moment, I had shattered not just their understanding of their origins, but their memories of the woman they had called mother. Sarah Barnes was dead, but the revelation of her complicity cast a shadow over every happy memory they had of her, every bedtime story and birthday cake and moment of maternal love. We closed the bakery early that day, sat in the small apartment above the shop, the three of us, while I told them everything. About the morning they were taken, about the years of searching, about finding Daniel's box in the attic and finally learning the truth, about the arrests that were happening even as we spoke, the network of accomplices being rounded up and brought to justice. They wept. I wept. We held hands across the kitchen table like we were drowning and each other was the only solid ground. The DNA test confirmed what our hearts already knew, but the official results helped bridge the gap between the impossible and the undeniable. My daughters were alive. They were healthy. They were sitting across from me at a diner in Millbrook, Montana, asking me questions about their early childhood, their real names, the lives they might have lived if their father hadn't destroyed everything with his monstrous selfishness. Emma, she still preferred Rebecca but was slowly getting used to me calling her by her birth name, was the one who asked the hardest questions. Why did he do it? How could he just abandon us here? Didn't he ever think about what this would do to you? I told her the truth, as much as I understood it. About the affair. About Christine. About Daniel's twisted logic that saw children as possessions to be hidden rather than loved. I told her about the journal, about his admissions of guilt balanced against his fear of consequences. I watched my daughter's face harden as she listened, watched her transform from a woman who had mourned the father she thought she knew into one who was beginning to understand the true nature of the man who had shaped her life with lies. Lily, she remained Rachel in the quiet of her own mind, but smiled every time I used her real name, was more interested in the years we had missed. What was I like as a baby? Did we have pets? Did you and Dad ever take us on vacation? Her questions were gentler, more focused on the life we should have had than the one we had lost. I answered every one, pulling memories from the vault where I had kept them safe for 19 years, polishing them until they shone. The trials began 6 months after the arrests. I attended every single one, sitting in the front row of each courtroom, making sure the defendants could see my face. I wanted them to know that I was watching. I wanted them to understand that their victim had not been broken, that the woman they had conspired to destroy was still standing, still fighting, still demanding justice. Marcus Webb's trial was first. His defense attorney tried to paint him as a simple man who had been manipulated by a sophisticated schemer, a trucker with a third-grade education who had genuinely believed he was rescuing children from abuse. The prosecutor dismantled this narrative piece by piece, showing that Marcus had received $20,000 for his services, that he had driven my daughters across state lines while they cried and begged for their mother, that he had never once questioned Daniel's story or considered going to the police. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Marcus Webb to 25 years to life, noting that his crime had caused immeasurable suffering to an innocent mother and her children. Emma attended that sentencing hearing with me. She sat rigid in her seat as the verdict was read, her jaw clenched, her eyes burning with a fury that I recognized because I felt it too. Afterward, she told me that watching Marcus Webb led away in handcuffs was the first time she had felt any sense of closure. The first time she truly believed that what had been done to us would not go unpunished. Helen Cross was next. Unlike Marcus, she showed no remorse at her trial, maintaining until the end that she had simply been helping her sister achieve her dream of motherhood. The prosecution presented evidence of the forged documents she had created, the birth certificates and school records that had given my daughters false identities. They showed that Helen had known the truth from the beginning, had known that Sarah was raising stolen children, and had never once considered the mother left behind to grieve. The jury found her guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, and obstruction of justice. She received 12 years in federal prison. Gerald Heston and Paul Whitfield, the company executives, were tried together. Their defense was that they had not known the full extent of Daniel's crimes, that they had merely helped a colleague with what they believed were routine administrative matters. But the evidence showed otherwise. Emails recovered from company servers revealed that both men had known Daniel was hiding his daughters under false identities. They had helped him manipulate travel records, create false documentation, and cover his tracks whenever suspicion threatened to surface. Both were found guilty. Gerald Heston received 8 years. Paul Whitfield received 10, his longer sentence reflecting his more active role in the conspiracy. Christine Palmer's trial was the last, and in many ways, the most difficult to watch. She had been the catalyst for everything, the affair that had set Daniel's monstrous plan in motion. But more than that, she had known the truth for 18 years and chosen silence over justice. Her defense attorney tried a different approach. He argued that Christine had been a victim too, a young woman seduced by a powerful man who had then threatened and manipulated her into silence. He produced evidence of the monthly payments Daniel had made, framing them not as hush money but as extortion, as if Christine had been forced to accept them rather than choosing to cash the checks that bought her comfortable lifestyle. I testified at her trial, sat in the witness box, and described the 19 years I had spent searching for my daughters, the breakdown that had landed me in a mental facility, the suicide attempts I had never told anyone about. I looked directly at Christine Palmer as I spoke, watched her face for any sign of remorse or empathy, and saw nothing but calculation. She was worried about her sentence, not about the suffering she had caused. The prosecutor asked me a question I will never forget. "Mrs. Sullivan, if Ms. Palmer had come forward at any point in the past 18 years, what would that have meant for you and your daughters?" I took a deep breath before answering. It would have meant everything. Every birthday I missed, every Christmas morning, every first day of school. It would have meant my daughters growing up knowing their real mother loved them. It would have meant I didn't spend nearly 2 decades believing they were dead. One phone call. That's all it would have taken. One moment of basic human decency. Christine Palmer was found guilty as an accessory after the fact and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Her husband filed for divorce while she was still in custody, and her children were placed with his parents. I felt a brief moment of sympathy for those children, innocent victims of their mother's choices, but it passed quickly. My own daughters had been innocent victims too, and Christine had never spared a thought for them. Lily came to the final day of Christine's trial, the day the sentence was handed down. Afterward, she found me in the hallway outside the courtroom, and we held each other for a long time without speaking. There was nothing to say. The woman who could have ended our nightmare with a single phone call was going to prison, and while that couldn't undo the years we had lost, it was something. It was justice. Detective Robert Hartley, the man who had led the original investigation, came forward publicly after the trials concluded. He held a press conference where he admitted that he had always suspected Daniel, but had never found enough evidence to pursue his instincts. He apologized to me directly, taking responsibility for the failures that had allowed my daughters to remain hidden for so long. The police department launched a comprehensive review of their cold case procedures, implementing new protocols designed to prevent similar failures in the future. Spouses of missing children would be investigated more thoroughly. Patterns of suspicious behavior would be documented and reviewed. The changes came too late to help me, but perhaps they would help some other mother searching for her children. Rebuilding a relationship that has been stolen is harder than any story can fully convey. There are no shortcuts, no magical montages where understanding blooms overnight. We were strangers who shared blood, who had a history that existed only in photographs and faded memories, and the inexplicable connection that seemed to pulse between us despite everything. I stayed in Montana for 3 months that first visit, rented a small cabin on the edge of town, and visited the bakery every day, learning my daughters' routines, meeting their friends, becoming a presence in lives that had never had space for me before. They were wary at first, and I couldn't blame them. The woman they had believed was their mother was only 3 years gone, and here I was, asking them to rewrite everything they thought they knew about themselves. But slowly, beautifully, walls began to come down. Emma, fierce and protective, started sharing stories from her childhood that she said she wanted me to have, as if she was offering me pieces of the years I had missed like gifts. Lily, gentle and thoughtful, began calling me mom in private moments, testing the word on her tongue, watching my face for reaction. Each time she said it, my heart cracked open a little more, letting in light that had been locked out for far too long. A year after I found them, Emma and Lily moved to Iowa, not to Cedar Falls, which held too many ghosts for all of us, but to a small town called Riverside, about 2 hours away. Close enough for Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations, far enough to maintain their independence and build lives that weren't defined by the tragedy of their origin. They kept the bakery in Millbrook, hiring a manager to run it while they explored new paths. Emma went back to school, studying criminal justice, determined to work in a field where she could help other families torn apart by unimaginable circumstances. Lily opened a small bookstore, specializing in children's literature, filling the shelves with stories of happy endings and families reunited. I sold the house on Maple Street, finally let go of the last physical connection to that September morning, that terrible Tuesday that had stolen 19 years of my life. The new owners were a young couple expecting their first child, and I gave them the tire swing in the backyard as a gift, hoping it might see the joy it was originally meant to provide. We had setbacks, moments when the weight of everything we had lost seemed too heavy to bear. Emma struggled with anger, rage at Daniel and his accomplices that had no easy outlet. She attended every parole hearing, making sure that those who had been convicted served their full sentences. She wrote letters to the parole board describing the impact of their crimes, ensuring that no one forgot what they had done. It was her way of channeling the fury, of turning something destructive into something that served justice. Lily battled guilt, an irrational feeling that somehow she should have known, should have remembered me, should have fought her way back to where she belonged. We worked through it together, the three of us, learning that healing isn't a destination but a journey, a continuous choice to keep moving forward. 3 years after the reunion, Emma got married. Her husband was a good man, a high school teacher named Michael who knew all about her past and loved her anyway. I walked her down the aisle, both of us crying, both of us thinking of the wedding we should have had when she was a little girl playing dress-up in her bedroom. Lily was maid of honor, standing beside her twin with the same matching dimples they'd had as 4-year-olds, the same unbreakable bond that not even 19 years of separation could destroy. The grandchildren came next. First from Emma, a little girl named Margaret after me, with her mother's dark hair and her father's easy laugh. Then from Lily, twin boys, named after characters from her favorite children's books. The cycle continued, life flowing forward, carrying us all toward a future that once seemed impossible. Emma started a foundation in our name, dedicated to supporting families of missing children. We provide funding for private investigators, legal assistance, and the kind of emotional support that I desperately needed and rarely received during my own search. Every year, on September 17th, the anniversary of the day my daughters were taken, we hold a gathering for families still in the darkness. We light candles. We share stories. We promise each other that we will never stop searching, never stop believing, never stop fighting for our children. Lily wrote a book about our experience, a memoir that became a bestseller and was optioned for a film that is currently in production. She handled the attention with grace, using her platform to advocate for changes in how missing children cases are investigated and how families of the missing are treated by law enforcement and the media. Her work has led to new legislation in several states, reforms that might prevent other families from falling through the cracks the way we did. Marcus Webb died in prison 4 years into his sentence, a heart attack that came without warning. I felt nothing when I heard the news. Helen Cross will be eligible for parole next year, but Emma has already prepared her statement for the hearing. Christine Palmer serves her time quietly, her appeals exhausted, her comfortable life a distant memory. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry at Daniel. The question always catches me off guard, as if the answer should be simple, as if there's a single emotion that can encompass everything he stole from me. Yes, I was angry. I was furious in ways that frightened me. But anger is exhausting. And somewhere along the way, in the long, slow process of rebuilding my life and my relationship with my daughters, I made a choice. I chose to let the anger go, not for Daniel's sake, because he doesn't deserve my forgiveness and will never receive it, but for my own sake, for Emma and Lily's sake, for the grandchildren who should never have to carry the weight of what their grandfather did. This morning, I woke early, before the sun, the way I always used to when the girls were small. The house was quiet, filled with the peaceful silence of sleeping grandchildren and satisfied lives. I made coffee, sat on the back porch, and watched the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to pink to gold. September 17th. The anniversary. 22 years since the day that broke me. 6 years since the day I put myself back together. I look at my life now, at the love that surrounds me, at the family I thought I had lost forever, and I understand that the best revenge against everyone who tried to destroy us is our happiness. Every birthday party, every holiday dinner, every ordinary Tuesday morning spent watching my grandchildren play. These are the victories they could never steal from me, because I refused to let them. The photograph that started everything, the one I found in Daniel's attic box, sits framed on my mantle now. My daughters at 23, standing in front of a white church, not yet knowing that their mother was still searching, still hoping, still refusing to believe they were gone forever. Beside it is a new photograph, taken last Christmas. Emma and Lily with their families, grandchildren on laps, matching dimples on display, me in the center with my arms around both of them. My name is Margaret Sullivan. My daughters were stolen from me on a September morning in 2002, and I spent 19 years searching for them. The man who took them died before I could confront him, but everyone who helped him is now in prison or dead. I found my girls. I held them in my arms. I watched them become mothers themselves, watched them break the cycle of deception and secrecy that nearly destroyed all of us. This is my story, but it's not really about me. It's about every parent who has ever lost a child, every mother who has refused to give up hope, every family that has been torn apart and somehow found a way back together. It's about the terrible things people do to each other, yes, but also about the beautiful things. The resilience, the determination, the fierce, unbreakable love that survives even when everything else is burned away. And it's about justice, about making sure that those who cause unimaginable suffering are held accountable for their crimes. If you're watching this and you're still searching, don't stop. If you're watching this and you've lost hope, find it again. If you're watching this and you have a loved one who has disappeared, keep their candle burning. The darkness is temporary. The dawn is coming. And justice, however long it takes, will eventually find those who deserve it. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for caring about my daughters, about the years we lost and the years we found. And if this story has touched you, if it has made you think about the people you love and the second chances we all deserve, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me about your own story, your own search, your own journey back from the darkness. We are not alone in this world. We were never alone. My name is Margaret Sullivan. My daughters are Emma and Lily. Every person who stole them from me has faced justice. And after 19 years of searching, we are finally, beautifully, irrevocably home.